What's up, everyone, and welcome into this week's edition of the Above Average Dynasty Podcast, where today we're going to be going over some trades. We're going to be ranking some players. But before we jump into that, I am your host, as always, Charlie, with me, my dear friend Kulek. Brother, how you doing? Are you not sick anymore? We had to take last week off. Are you okay?
I'm not sick anymore. I'm feeling better. It reminds me I have to take my antibiotic tonight, but yeah, it's I needed some amoxicillin apparently, man. I was
Jesus.
2 weeks of just 2-3 weeks of just and it was all upper respiratory, man. Like I'm in the Midwest, and like today it was 70, and tomorrow after some storms it's supposed to be like 28 degrees, man. It just kills me.
Oh my God. See that
Yep.
My manager, who's around your age, it just has been dealing with a sickness for like the last couple of weeks, and it's just like the idea, as someone who rarely gets like sick, the idea of being sick for weeks on end just sounds like a misery. I don't look forward to those days, and I also don't look forward to 28. I got a nice little notification from my phone that said the high of tomorrow is 84. In February.
84 tomorrow?
Yeah. It's great.
That's so funny. What's the low tomorrow?
That's a good question. I think it's like it's in like the 50s. Yeah, it's like 55, something like that.
That sounds nice. I just think the spread is so funny in Michigan sometimes. Like it's supposed to be like 72 high, 28 low. Like how does that happen?
God.
How does that?
See, we've hit the weird point of the year where it's like you get these spreads across the country. I remember when I worked at Costco, I would go in early morning and it'd be like 45 degrees, and then I'd walk out to my car and it would be 90 degrees.
Blazing
like,
hot.
What in the world? Why? Give me one. Don't let me. I don't want to come out in a hoodie when it's blazing hot out here in my car. My steering wheel hurts just a touch.
Like what you go into work with is what you want to like have it be appropriate for when you come out. It's very annoying to go into work and have it like be a different climate, be a different, like a whole different geographical entity.
That kind of work is always kind of blew my mind, because you'd go into a building and there wouldn't be any windows, and you'd go in it pitch black, and then you'd come out and it'd be sunny. It's like, damn, the day is progressing for.
Dude, I don't know if you knew this about me, but I used to work in a casino, so I'm reminded of that. It sounds exactly like my days at the casino.
When did you work at a casino? I know you attended the casino a bunch.
I did, yeah. When I moved out to Grand Rapids, with a buddy of mine, I needed some stable income of some sort. So I applied for a job at Gun Lake Casino in Michigan and worked at the promotions desk. So I was the guy over the microphone and loudspeaker, like giving away money and coupons and prizes and stuff like that. So
yeah, honestly, that fits you. You couldn't name a better job for you. Just get on a microphone and be loud.
Be loud and obnoxious and super excited for people. Yeah, it was awesome. Giving away money and letting them spin wheels and all kinds of crazy shit. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. You're just the vibe guy for the casino. I know. I was looking for new jobs today. I was looking at some job postings, and there was one for one of the Detroit casinos, and I was like, well, could I make that work? Man, that sounds kind of fun. I'm like, no, God. I'm old. I can't do that no more.
Shit, bro.
I know.
You don't need to be any closer to a casino than you already probably get on a bi-weekly basis.
I'm already I'm already taking Friday off. I'm playing hooky on Friday. I'm going to the casino with a couple friends. So you're you know me a little too well at this point.
I do. But one thing I do know is you've been jumping in. You've actually been getting back into startups. We're in the dregs of the off season where there's not really a lot to talk about, but I am curious. You've managed to get some startups underneath your belt. What's a takeaway you've developed over the last few startups that you kind of weren't expecting?
I definitely expected some QBs to fall more than they are. It's kind of like Justin Fields last year again, where what was he going at, like the 108, like
109,
109. T-Law was like 107, 108. And we talk about this all the time. As soon as you drafted them, it's basically like you bought a new car and you drove it off the lot, and trade value wise, you already lost a quarter of its value. And So I expected there to be some adjustment with that, and I still think T-Law. Again, I haven't looked at some of our drafting websites lately, but T-Law still feels like he's too high. I think we both agree Anthony Richardson feels too high. So as much as I like quarterbacks in 2QB and Superflex, it just feels generally like they're being slightly overvalued, whereas I thought they would be. People would adjust this year for whatever reason. So.
No, I mean that's the debate we always seem to have, that trade, because we do our trade value stuff, and we try to stay really in tune with trade values and all that, and it really, one thing I relied upon a lot was ADP values for trades, and it's really not trade ADP value and like trade open market value are just not always the same. It's because you get into these startups and the psychology of, you're sitting there at pick 14, 15, and you're like, well, I'm sitting here at pick 14, 15. My next pick's not coming up for another 12 picks if I'm doing third round reversal, even longer if I'm not. And it's like, do I pick Jordan Love, Trevor Lawrence, or do I roll the dice that I'm going to come back around and there's not going to be anything? And that's a place that people just kind of don't want to be. They don't want to lose the draft before it really gets rolling. So
yeah, you have to be willing. If you do that, I'll tell you this: if you do that, you have to be willing to be okay with like Daniel Jones being your QB2. Yeah, and
that's what people are scared of, man.
I know, and it feels gross, but again, you look at your value above replacement when you've got CMC or you've got Tyreek and you've got maybe you want Justin Jefferson. I'm trying to think: Justin Jefferson, Tyreek, Dak, or something. If you're able to do that, or that seems unlikely, but something like that. Again, it depends on the league. It depends on a lot of different factors, like you said. But the other thing, the running backs are really interesting to me. It feels like to me, no one knows what the fuck they're going to do with running backs.
Well, part of that feels like it gets disgusting after like the 13th running back. I was looking at it with a friend the other day, and it's just like you get after like Barkley, Pacheco, Rashad White, and you drop down to that like Tajay Spears, Javonte Williams, David Montgomery tier. Just like Tony Pollard, Najee. It's like, man, you don't feel really all that good about it. To you in these startups, are running backs falling, or are they just kind of in the mix a little bit?
I think they're just I think that's a good way of putting it. They're just kind of in the mix a little bit, and I think there's value to be had. I think, and we talk about this in our DMs, but zagging when people zig, right? Or zigging when people zag, and
just take value.
Just take value, and I think you have to in a lot of startups. And I think it's where you're going to feel gross at, right? Like, are you going to feel gross taking Daniel Jones as your QB2, or are you going to feel gross taking Tony Pollard as your RB1 or 2, right? Like that also feels very, very disgusting. Kenneth Walker, I'll tell you, he is a guy I got to look more into, because I can't tell if he's falling, if he's rising, or if he's exactly where he should be, because every single startup I've had so far, which I think is three or four, he always comes to me. I've lost track already. It's been a long 2 weeks, man. That is the one guy where I generally don't know what I'm doing with him. And in one draft, I got him in like the 5th. One draft, I passed on him in like the late 4th. And one draft, I forget, something like that. And it's just like, oh my God, I have no idea what to do with him. And I kind of freeze up. So he's an interesting, with the situation and whatnot, and the coaching change and everything like that. So
absolutely. I mean, speaking of Kenneth Walker, let's take this opportunity and roll into our first segment. I'm going to actually do something a little cruel. Is you don't know really what to do with them. So what we're going to be doing for this segment is we're going to do a few rounds of just I'm going to throw out a handful of players, and I want us to kind of walk ourselves through ordering these players, putting them in order, and there's going to be a theme to each group. And this first one is going to be, speaking of Walker, is going to be that that second tier of running back after you get those top four. So I want you to rank Jonathan Taylor, Devon Achane, Kenneth Walker, Kyren Williams, and Travis Etienne.
Gross.
this is
gross.
This is tough. I feel like there's one gimme there. There's one definite gimme there for sure. Is you just put JT at one and then just figure out the other four, right?
That was my instinct. I think he's got, they all, thinking about all of them, I would say, obviously Achane has probably the most upside in terms of situation, in terms of what he's shown already, in terms of scheme.
Do you think though? I mean, JT was number one overall at one point. Kyren Williams averaged 20 points per game last year and was the RB2 in terms of points per game. Like, I get what you mean that like he was the most. I think he had the highest like.
He broke fantasy football for 3 weeks. Legitimately broke it.
I mean, he broke yard per carry metrics. He broke PFF's like grading scale. He was a monster.
He gained like a first, almost. He gained at least a first, if not a first and a half in value in 3 weeks or whatever it was. That's insane.
I mean, those monster games, that'll do it to you. But yeah, I mean, so
he's last in my book. He's last. Like, I know that. I know I want him last, and I want JT first. I think you hit the head on JT.
You're putting Walker over Achane. That's at the moment. Those two are a round and a half difference in startups.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I've not taken Achane in any of the startups. I'm passing at that price.
Too much of a risky pill to swallow with your like 40th pick, where it's just like, man, I don't know what I'm getting out of this guy.
Yeah, if that's the case, if he's there, I mean, I got to feel like there's a lot of people who would love to trade up to get him. So I would look to trade down to a Kenneth Walker or a Kyren or somebody like that. Again, I don't have the rounds in front of me, but yeah, if I can, make a trade down and get a Walker plus a little piece, plus a little upgrade at a future pick, maybe like moving up from like a 10th to an 8th or something like that, or a 9th to a 7th. Yeah, I think I'm doing that. Again, I like Walker. I like his situation. I've always liked him as a prospect. Obviously, being an MSU fan, where I'm literally wearing an MSU polo right now. I forgot
about that.
So I get to watch him a little bit more. Yeah. So I mean, I like his situation. And I can't say anymore. I like the offense that he's in, obviously, because it's going to be like a total change. We'll have to see. Maybe Charbs gets a majority, like maybe timeshare majority of the work, possibly. So you're taking on a lot of risk, but I mean, between Achane's injuries, I don't think I have a lot of trust in Mike McDaniels. I don't want to say having a bell cow, because they're never going to have a bell cow, and we've talked about this. That's rare nowadays, right? But having a system where he gets 17 reliable touches seems very iffy to me. I don't know.
No, I mean that's the fear. I mean it's the fear with all these guys in terms of with running backs with their weight, when they're not hitting 200 pounds. Are they going to be able to sustain 15 plus touches a game and then be able to get those touches and then stay healthy with those touches? That's the fear that Achane is kind of putting into everybody. Is he showed you both sides of what he is. He was one of the most electric players in all of football last year with minimal touches, and then he still got hurt with minimal touches. So I can get the fear there. So it looks like I think you and I both agree in general that JT is 1, Achane's 5, and Walker is probably 4 of those. So between Kyren and Etienne, I always love having these conversations, because Kyren is so difficult to peg right now, where he was that monster. He is the guy on the Rams. He's not likely to be replaced, and he produced. But on the other hand, he's a day 3 running back, and we all know the history of those puppies. If you're getting on a clock, if you're getting on the board and you're sitting there in the early 4th, are you taking Kyren Williams or Travis Etienne? Going safe or going upside, so to speak? I know you like upside, so that's my answer, just to answer the question.
I love Travis Etienne as a prospect, as a fantasy player, as a. Do you remember? I don't know if you remember this, but what was it? A year or two ago, I traded Swift for Etienne. Maybe it was with you actually. It might have been with you.
Might have been. We both
But it was
had
when
both all those players.
yeah. And I think it was in one of our main leagues. And I remember saying to you after watching a couple ETN games, this is after he got the bell cow his first year when James Robinson, did he get hurt and then traded? I think. Something like that.
I don't know if he got hurt. I just know ETN just kind of stole his job. Like
and then he got
James
traded,
Robinson
right?
James Robinson came out with I think like a week 1, like 20 carry game, 1 touchdown, and everybody all the ETN shares plummeted, and then just over the course of the next 3 weeks, ETN just got rolling, and James Robinson, I think, either got injured. I think he eventually got traded to the Jets, I think, for nothing.
Yeah, for like
and
a seventh, or something like that.
Speaking of day 3 running backs and why we're all scared, or worse, and all scared of them, is they just kind of just evaporate.
And so ETN has better draft capital. He obviously, I think he was given the reins to the system earlier and more confidently, I guess. Like he won the job, whereas I don't know. Did it really feel like Kyren
feels like the last man standing, right?
Right, exactly. Right. Akers went into the season. He was supposed to be the bell cow. Like everyone knew that
Sean
McVay didn't like Akers, and so we kind of thought that. But like no one was drafting the Akers backup highly. No one was drafting Kyren highly. It wasn't like it was like some crazy sought after. Like I'm gonna burn an 11th or something on him in a startup. So it kind of just felt like he was the last one standing. Yeah.
Well, it felt like his backup was the rookie running back they picked, Zach Evans.
That's a good point.
I have a handful of Zach Evans shares, and that just went nowhere.
Yeah, no, I forgot about him. That's a great point. And now it's like, do you draft Zach Evans kind of late? You can get him in the probably like 16th, 17th, and like, is there a chance that there's a lot of things at play. But yeah, I've always liked ETN. My point earlier with the story was that I felt like after watching ETN towards the end of his first year, I think I said to you, this is what I expected to watch with Swift. A hard runner, a dynamic runner, a pass catcher,
shifty pass catcher, kind of small but dynamic.
Yeah. And this is when he was getting, 6 to 8 catches a game. So in PPR, an absolute monster. And now really since then, he had a good stretch last year, or this year, I should say. But really he's not had the pass catching upside that I think we thought he would all have. So because of that, I think I got to go with Kyren. I think the tape and what he put together last year in fantasy, literally being a league winner. I mean,
absolutely.
Give me Kyren, give me those 24 whatever points per game, ridiculous in PPR, same offense, same quarterback. I don't. No, this is the first year they have a first, but they have so many holes because they kept passing the buck with cap space like the Saints do. They have so many holes. They're not going to burn. You wouldn't expect them to burn an early pick on a running back.
I wouldn't, especially because we talk ad nauseum that there's not really a running back to burn for this pick. Mm-hmm. I don't think you might get a guy. They just always have a habit of drafting that late round running back just because that just seems to be the trend nowadays. But I wouldn't expect them to draft that guy to replace Kyren. So to sum it up, JT, Kyren, ETN, Walker, and Achane, which means Walker is probably a buy and Achane is probably a sell. Moving on to an interesting one to me. We're going to go sophomore wide receiver edition.
Ooh.
Rank for me, Tank Dell, Zay Flowers, Addison, or Jackson Smith-Njigba. Not or. Rank them all in order to you. If you want me, the one thing that stands out to me is funny enough, the JSN is the lowest ADP, and if I'm being honest with you, I do want more JSN than I have. I loved him at one point, and I just kind of, as a means of trying to compete, I wound up not having much of him anymore.
Right.
But I almost feel like JSN really doesn't deserve to be at the bottom of this list.
No, not with his talent, not where he was going in rookie drafts. I mean, I would agree with you. The one that stands out to me is, and I know this might shock you because I was for I think a week and a half a big Addison stan. I definitely think Addison is trailing in the group. He may be third in values, trailing JSN, but to me, it's definitely JSN over Addison.
Does the JJ trade rumors not really give you any cause for pause of like, okay, because I think I understand where you're going with this. The other three have this perception that they could be the one eventually. Now, obviously, you know, Dell is behind, Nico Collins behind, quote unquote. JSN is behind DK and Lockett, and Flowers is behind the star Rashad Bateman. But
I thought for sure you were going to say Mark Andrews. You threw me for a loop.
No, you saw the. I don't know if you saw there was a tweet or there was a report that Harbaugh is like, Bateman is going to get a lot more work next year, and that just gives me all the copium to jump right back on the train and just.
Oh, I bet. I bet you booked your ticket.
I'm gonna get hurt another time, baby. Let's go.
Let's go. I mean, listen.
But yeah, Addison's perceived as this guy that he's kind of locked into his two. He's basically the next in line to be in this T. Higgins, Brandon Ayuk, Waddle, and Devonta kind of tough spot to be in, where you're just kind of locked behind an alpha. But there is a chance that he becomes the only man in town, so to speak. What does that not give you cause for pause?
No, not at all. Not at all. I just you know, I mean. I don't buy it. All I'm gonna say, I want to say one thing about Rashad Bateman. I mean, at least he didn't fumble at the 1 yard line.
Oh,
and
then cut his hand on a bench right after.
Oh yeah, that was not a great moment. But seriously, I mean, Addison feels like he has. I'm gonna balance out the JJ rumors with the fact that their QB situation is pretty murky.
I didn't realize that Kirk Cousins is just a straight up unrestricted free agent. I don't know why I never caught that. It just never came up in any of the reports I was looking at. But that's surprising because that's if they don't have Kirk Cousins, that's going to hurt even JJ. Although he did fine with the backup, but still,
it is a little surprising that it hasn't hurt JJ's value at all. I was just going to say that.
Well, didn't he ball out with the backup pretty decently?
Yeah, but he had the backup that literally slings. He threw for what was it like against the Lions? It was like 475 yards and 5 picks or 4 picks or something. Yeah, I mean, he had the backup that was willing to, when they get if they get a system quarterback in there, they get somebody like, I'm just throwing a name out there. I don't think this is actually going to happen, but let's say they get like a Russ in there or something. Like,
let's say they get a Jacoby Brissett.
I mean, yeah. So if he gets a Jacoby Brissett, I think he'll be okay-ish. I don't think it should hurt his value that much. It's just funny that nobody's talking about it. I think.
I agree.
I don't know. Addison, I definitely think he would be the one I'm buying least out of the group. I like the idea that Lockett could be on the chopping block. I think he has a pretty sizable cap hit the last time I looked. So, and again, we've talked about this. Like, DK has not met expectations. I just don't think he's a like an alpha one. I don't think he's a Mike Evans. He's more of a he's a Mike tough Williams. Guy to comp, honestly. Yeah, he's like a healthier Mike Williams, to be honest with you. I think that's a good analogy. So, I think JSN has a very decent chance if they do cut Lockett to be the next I hate that phrase, the next, but to be an Amon-Ra type alpha. And
I mean, he looked good. I mean, he had that game winner later in the year that looked very similar to some of the touchdowns that he had at Ohio State. I mean, I think he came on. So I follow where you're going. I think I have a surprising take for you. I think if I had to put one of these guys at number 1, I would honestly probably go Tank Dell over the other three. I was going to
go Tank Dell.
I think you just have to because it's it's a pain in the neck to kind of bet on a guy that had a limited window. That we saw this with Elijah Moore's rookie year, where anything can happen in a small sample size. But this guy just got so many targets, and he was so good.
Yep.
And I think if Zay Flowers was in an offense that was more conducive to more passing, I think I would obviously want him because I think he's capable of being that like alpha level guy in terms of just.
I think Zay Flowers is more talented than Tank Dell. I mean, from what I've seen on tape, I mean, that's no knock on Tank Dell. I mean, again, it's not unheard of to say, this is fantasy, right? Like they can be better in real life than they are in fantasy, but I just think.
That's the tough part is like I'm trying to come at this with a little more sensibleness because I do believe Zay Flowers. If we're just ranking the four in terms of pure ability as wide receivers, I'm putting Zay Flowers above all the other three by a pretty large margin. But it's annoying that we play fantasy and the equation of fantasy points is talent times opportunity. You have to get the opportunity and convert it through your talent. So we've seen that that Stroud is just gonna, because of the quarterback that he is and the offense they have, they're just gonna throw it more than the Ravens are, which both teams are outstanding successful, but it's just not gonna lead to the same level of opportunity for Zay Flowers that you're gonna get with a Tank Dell. So I think I would tend to agree with you. If I had to go through these four, I would probably just go Dell, Flowers, JSN, Addison. How's that sound to you, brother?
That's perfect. That's exactly what I would do. And I would argue that, you could really argue, and again, I don't know what round Addison's going in, but they all feel kind of like buys.
They're all just in that fifth round. They're all that fifth round. Speaking
if
of
if Edison's in the fifth round, then I'm probably not buying him. The other three feel like a buy then.
But. Yeah, I'd agree. It's one of those things. I would probably tend to let the draft play out where I'd want a running back in like the third, fourth round to get one of those elite guys, and then I would want to get one of those elite running backs either in the second round or the fourth round that we were talking about, and then come back around and get a wide receiver in these fifth, sixth rounds that are just get the end of this long wide receiver 2 tier. Yep. So yeah, I would tend to agree that they're buys. I want to maybe call a little bit of an audible. Speaking of fifth round sophomore wide receivers, where would you put Rashee Rice on that list?
Oh, I like Rice. He's a dog.
I like Rice too. Yeah.
He's a dog. It feels like they're going to bring in somebody in free agency. It doesn't feel like they're going to bring in somebody star level to me. I mean, I don't know about you, but it's just really tough to imagine like Mike Evans taking, again, if he's going to take less money with the team, it's going to be with the Chiefs or someone like that. But it just feels like they're going to get somebody kind of mid-ish, and they're going to roll out him and Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce and kind of run it back.
I'm honestly pretty darn sure that they're just going to draft a guy because you're going to, because the problem is like. Okay. So if you're the GM of the Chiefs and you're sitting there and you can either sign Marquise Brown for a spot track market value of $14.8 million per year, or with your 64th overall pick, you can take a wide receiver who is probably projected maybe to be somewhat nearly as good as Marquise Brown and have a 2024 cap hit of $1.1 million.
I don't know the Chiefs well enough to know exactly where their holes are. I mean, obviously they're coming off a Super Bowl win, so their holes can't be that big.
Mostly just free agency. It's really that's kind of the struggle. I think their only hole really is just going to be their free agents. L'Jarius Sneed, their corners, Chris Jones at tackle. Like that's their only real priority, and to maybe find a wide receiver too somewhere along the lines.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I mean, the more free agents they have, which I know Snead and a few others were free agents, and they were working on franchise tagging them, then looking maybe to trade them or seeing about a long-term deal. But yeah, it makes more sense to draft somebody. So I would agree with that. I definitely would agree with that. Again, I think they're going to bring in somebody pretty mid. I mean, who'd they bring in last year? They brought in like Mecole Hardman. Or they brought in what? MVS.
They drafted Rashee Rice. That's really what they did. They
retained
retained their wide receiving core and of Tony and and MVS and Christian Watson and Sky Moore, and then just drafted Rashid Rice and let him develop into one.
The question for me, I still put Tank Dell ahead of Rashid Rice. The question for me is,
interesting.
I want Rashid?
I might not do that.
You might not do that. You might like Rice over everyone.
I think Rice becomes the one there. I think I excluded him originally because to me he was the clear one, but he's going between Dell and Flowers, so he's in that. He's firmly in that sophomore, rising sophomore tier. For people,
I would go with that. I think for me, it's not the question of Tank or Rashid Rice. It's Flowers or Rashid Rice. That's where I struggle with, because I like both of those guys a lot. You know, give me the guy who's going to be with Mahomes probably the next 4 years versus the guy who's going to be with Lamar the next 4 years. I mean, Lamar's Lamar and he's great, but he's just not the passer that. And he doesn't run the same style of offense. He just, Lamar's a really interesting quarterback. I'll say that.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's pretty much one of one in arguably in the history of the NFL. Like we've had guys that we've obviously had, the Randall Cunninghams, the Mike Vicks, the Cam Newtons that are mobile, but he just takes it to a different level, especially with the evolution, the way the NFL has evolved to this kind of very open towards running quarterbacks.
It's interesting with him because it's like I watched him put up like 50 points on the Lions this year and literally we had no answer. Not one thing that we did. Now, granted, we are notoriously terrible against running quarterbacks, but he put on a literal show. Like I wasn't even that mad about losing. Like I was mad initially, and then I'm like, oh my God, this guy is freaking, Jesus walking on water here. And then, I'll watch him kind of shit the bed, like, especially in the playoffs. And not that he had a bad game or anything like that, but
I think that might have been more of his issue.
It's not all on him. I think he kind of like struggles on when to run and when to pass. And I just don't think he's a strong, obviously not as strong passer as Mahomes. So, I don't think you can go wrong with either Rice or Tank or Zay Flowers. They're all good choices. I mean, I think they're all kind of buys in that 5th round area.
I'd agree. Now, moving on to our last little grouping here. This is actually going to be a little bit more spread out in terms of values, but I do think I want to draw the point that these guys are probably a lot closer than their ADPs would suggest. Would rank for me Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, Deshaun Watson, and Bryce Young.
All right. The first thing I'm going to say is, as the resident Lions fan, Goff's value is too high.
Yeah, you don't think sitting there between Devonta Smith and Tank Dell and Kincaid, he might be a little bit up there.
Value is from being in these startups, Goff's value is too high. It's like you should be happy drafting him as your QB2 or 3, not excited that he's your QB1. And I see too many people getting really excited about drafting him. Where's he going, in like the 5th?
Yeah, he's going. I got him sitting here at the 412. So yeah, right.
Yeah,
right at that 4-5 turn. Whereas last year he was going at like the 5-6 turn. So people are really buying into that nice season that he managed to put together.
Yeah, it'll be interesting going forward. I mean, the upside is obviously, not there in terms of his rushing ability. I mean, he's one of the worst statues in mobility I've ever seen in a quarterback. I mean, it's mind-boggling that he, and I think he has the ability to run more. So it's interesting. It will be interesting to see if he scrambles a little bit more, especially having a front seat show at the Brock Purdy exhibit, running and scampering for 15 yards and destroying the Lions. But getting off topic there, but Goff's value is too high. I like Kirk a lot. I think he's undervalued, and I think it's because of his Achilles, and I don't think that should be as big of a concern as probably people are adjusting for.
When did Kirk tear his Achilles? Like, which week was that?
It had to have been like 6 or 5 or something. It was pretty early on. Let's see if we can find that.
Kirk Cousins, week 8. So
week 8. Okay, so a little later than I thought. Yeah.
So that would have put him at like early November. So you give him Man, I can understand why people are concerned because you're just not sure he's going to be there week one. It's really tough when you draft your QB2 and you're not really sure he's actually going to be there to start the season for you.
Yeah, you're I'll tell you, at his value, you're really banking on him being there, and if he's not, then you'd rather overpay for Goff, who is going to be there, who's in the same system, probably gets an upgrade in terms of JMO is probably coming on a bit, and so but again, Kirk was great. Kirk was significantly better than Goff if I'm remembering his numbers correctly. Like, we're talking in most formats 2 to 3 points per game better, which, in a system where they're both under 20, the difference between 19 and a half and 17 or 18 and 20 is fairly significant.
Yeah, it feels like one of those situations where you're paying for the age with Jared Goff, which I think
for the age.
I think some people forget that after that Rams stint, some people were concerned that he might pull a Baker and just really kind of struggle to find his next starting gig. So I don't before he got traded. So I would probably be, like you said, Goff is probably a sell at the prices, but I think it's probably safe to say I was about to say as a stable asset, he's probably the number one on this group. But would you put a Watson or a Bryce above him in general?
I think in terms of
Watson's kind of tempting.
Watson is tempting. I would say in terms of stability, you're right that Goff is the most stable, and he's the safe pick. And you know how I feel about that. The safe pick usually doesn't win you fantasy football leagues.
It also doesn't lose you then in the fifth and sixth rounds of a startup.
That's very true. So I think Goff is a decent pick in that whatever you said, he's going 412, early fifth. He's a decent pick probably, especially if you feel like you killed the early parts of your draft. If you're sitting there and you really need a QB2, somebody who will get you, a solid 15 to 20 points consistently, and you feel like the early part of your draft is really going to carry you, he's probably the best quarterback to take. I mean, if you're looking for sheer upside, I think now this is going to surprise a lot of people. I think Bryce is the pick that a lot of people would say, hey, if you're looking for upside, Bryce is it. I'd say Deshaun.
Bryce was going at the. I mean, it's a very weird grouping because both Bryce and Watson were second round startup picks last year. Like we're not very far removed from these guys being very viewed as high-end fantasy assets.
Yeah, they were going. They were always going. The last couple months, they've been always going right next to each other in startups. There was a Reddit thread, and it was basically these two guys are going, whatever it was, 7th and 8th or 10th and 12th, whatever it was, and who do you like? And what was funny was being on Reddit, I always assumed I went in assuming, which you shouldn't do. That they were going to say that Bryce, especially with, Reddit's hive mentality where, this guy is a abuser, which he is, and a horrible person. And, Bryce is a Heisman winner and he was in a historically bad offense. All makes perfect sense. And I go in this thread and it's literally everybody saying, take Deshaun. I would never take Bryce over Deshaun. Just over and over and over.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of
I agree with
that's the tough part is people do, the further time heals, they say time heals all wounds, and I think time heals all public perceptions. So I think, Tyreek's benefited from this, Deshaun's benefited from this. I think you're just, the further you get away from it, I think people just kind of move away, and I would tend to agree. I think I think both you and I would agree that Watson and Bryce are buys at their current price. I would probably tend to prefer Watson over Bryce for sure. But
I mean, Watson has proved to everybody at one point or another that he is a very legitimate starting quarterback in this league. And
he proved it before he got suspended. I don't know if he's proved it since then.
I mean, he was again, from a fantasy perspective, he showed that he can and probably should put up quarterback one fantasy points going forward. And if he doesn't, then obviously that's a problem. But he's shown that he can. Again, I think the perception is he was worse last year when he played than he actually was. If I recall, and again, he did not play a lot of games. I want to say he played like 5 games or something like that. I want to say
for sure.
Very small. I want to say he was the QB. He was a QB1 in 3 out of the 5 games.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the problem for him is I don't think he passed the eye test in those games. But he just proved the idea that for a fantasy quarterback, you just want the rushing upside really, really just matters. And he's got the legs. He's going to move. So
do we want the guy? Here's the thing: do we want the guy on a historically bad franchise who doesn't seem to be going anywhere fast at the moment, or do we want a guy on a team that just went to the playoffs who has a great head coach, great offensive coordinator? And again, their system did not match what they said they were going to do last offseason. We've talked about that. But again, I like quarterbacks who are on winning teams because they tend to put up fantasy points, especially as the weeks go on. They're playing for something.
Yeah, I would agree. So I think we kind of settled it. It's probably going to be, I think if we had to rank these 4, it would be a Goff, it would be a Deshaun Watson, a Bryce Young. Would you go Bryce over Kirk? Just because of the torn Achilles, pretty much?
Yeah, pretty much. I would go Bryce over Kirk, I think.
Yeah, I think Bryce is a good buy, especially because I would not be surprised if Carolina went on a small spending spree, drafted someone with that 2nd round pick, and did just that their head coach converted OC seems to be really good with quarterbacks. So I would not be surprised if he was able to turn it around. There's going to be a lot of hype.
There's going to be a lot of hype around that team going into this offseason. I mean especially in OTAs and yeah.
You gotta have some to root for. That was a miserable year that they had last year.
It can't get much worse, I feel like. When Adam Thielen's your wide receiver 1, it just what are we really expecting?
If fantasy has taught me anything, it doesn't always have to get worse, but it doesn't have to get better.
Very true.
That's
very, very true.
The fantasy has told me that, shown me that many times, and the Falcons most recently showed me that you can just stay bad, and they just may stay bad. But let's move on to our next segment. We just like last episode, I pulled together some trade threads. I pulled some Reddit posts for some trade questions, and I think it'd be fun just to go through these. First, starting off, if you had the 107 and the 110. Which rookie pick would you be gunning for if you were going to take both of those and try to move up?
103. I would try for 103.
You nailed that. I think you're spot on.
You think so? Because this is more your area. I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just looking at ADPs, you've got the 107 sitting in like the 5th round. You've got the 110 sitting in the 7th round. So you can't tell me in a startup you couldn't package the 5th and the 7th round startup pick for like a late 2nd, just straight up. Mm-hmm. And you can't because I think the one thing that people always find in this time of the year when you're trying to make moves for picks or anything regarding picks is people have that perception that picks always increase in value up into the draft, which sometimes is, sometimes isn't. But if every single piece is a pick, it doesn't really bear fruit. You really just all of them in theory should increase. So I think it's very easy to go to that 103 owner, especially if that 103 owner is someone who struggled last year to wind up with a 103. They probably need the more more spins at the wheel than they need just the one Jaden Daniels, Drake May kind of pick. So I think that's definitely kind of the line, especially as we're seeing Roma Dunze get more hype, and it really just strengthens that 107. That 107 is going to be a good player no matter what.
The stronger, the key is that 107. The stronger that 107 becomes, the more likely it is. So, I mean, my rationale was a little bit simpler, and I'm glad you went into a little bit more theory because so here's what I know. I know that 107 and 110 is not going to get me Marvin Harrison Jr. I know that 107 and 110 isn't going to get me Caleb Williams. So I'm going to try for the next best thing.
Yeah.
That was my general idea. Yeah, shoot for it. Yeah. Now, the question was in my mind, assuming that, like, let's say somebody has 103 and 104 and you send 107 and 110 for 103 and they counter with 104. What are you doing?
I'd probably take that.
I'd probably take it too. I think I would take it too. So it was almost like I'm going to shoot for 103, but I'm going to settle for 1-4 and say something, you're lucky I'm in a trading mood. It's like, I think I would take that still.
Man, I think that's a good one. But let's moving on to the next one. Would you sell? This is actually going to pertain to what we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
If you were in a rebuild, would you sell Kyler Murray for Jared Goff, a mid-25 first and a mid-26 first?
It really mattered how bad my team was.
Yeah, if you're in a rebuild, it's kind of that the idea is you're definitely not competing for next year unless you just hit on a bunch of stuff.
I think Kyler, here's the thing with this trade. I think that Goff is really tough. It would be really tough to sell for market value, in that 412 range. So to get like a first and a half basically, or a little under that, I think he's tough to get that value for and get that value realized. And then I'm only gaining a mid first in 25 and 26. I think Kyler was good enough last year. I think he was really good actually when he came back. I mean, considering what he came back from, where I just want to see, like, I'm willing to roll the dice. I want to see the first 3 to 5 games, and I want to see him come out swinging. And if he puts up QB like 1 to 5, somewhere in that range, I'm using that to then heighten the offer I get. So I like this offer in a vacuum. I think it's an offer that if you're in a total rebuild, you have to at least consider. But I almost feel like it's not good enough to take right away. And if you're in a total rebuild, you have to roll the dice a little bit. And I think you roll the dice, wait those first 3 to 5 games, let them ball out, and then you move them for something better.
Especially if the Cardinals are projected to get a Marvin Harrison, you're going to have Kyler with a weapons room. So he's got the ammo to really run. I guess. Yeah, I would tend to agree. My first instinct, if you're in a rebuild, is to tear down in that way. And I think picking up Goff and 2 firsts is kind of nice. But I do tend to agree that I would say Kyler is probably more of a hold and Goff is more of a sell. So unless what I would do in this scenario, if this was what I had offered, I would, we're sitting at the end of February and we got plenty of time in our hands. I would just start tinkering around with 3-team deals, and I'd be trying to, I would make that third that Goff flip contingent on the deal. Like I'll do the deal, but we have to find that buyer for Goff before it goes through.
Mm-hmm. And it's got to be it's got to be for at least like a first and a quarter, if not a first and a half. Like if you don't get that, because that mid 26, it kind of sucks. Like, you kind of want to get like the 107, 108, like something, or like, I mean, he's sitting in that like sophomore tier. If you could flip, let's say you could find a buyer for Goff and you got JSN for Goff. Love it.
Okay. Do it. Yeah. I would tend to agree. That's probably, you just need to find the buyer for Goff, but at kind of that market rate, which could be tough, but I mean, it's
if you could get, I'm just thinking like, if you could move Goff for like the 201, 202 this year. And so if you traded, basically, if you made a 3-team deal where you sold Kyler for mid 25, mid 26, 201 and 202, like, I don't know, like I kind of like that. That sounds kind of fun. Like you get to, there's a lot of moving parts that you could possibly do. There's a lot of things that you could do that are really unique and cool. You could wait to the draft. You could already trade them. I just think Goff is such a hindrance on your team until, I mean, again, we're in February. We're coming into March for like 5 months. Goff is just kind of sit on your roster unless you can move him.
Yeah, I the only pushback I would say, I guess, to all of this, because I tend to agree with you, but man, there's that theory that once you have one of those elite quarterbacks, even in a rebuild, you don't move them. Is it one of those situations where there's not, unless you just get blown out of the water, it's not going to feel good. Quarterback? Hey, Kyler was like the one.
We haven't talked about an elite quarterback. Who are you talking about?
I'm talking about Kyler, man. Kyler is really good. If you give him more weapons and you let him ball, I think he's gonna go back to being a top 6, 7, 8 startup pick.
Probably. I have some concerns. I just don't. I don't. It's tough for me to project him to be a consistent top 7 quarterback year in and year out. I don't know what it is about him. It's not his height. It's not his video game playing. What's that?
It's really the injury history, I imagine, is what gives you the heebie-jeebies.
That I would say that is number 1 or 2. The other one is I don't know if he has the person. And again, this is just like
we were really just
a couch.
We're going all the way into narratives, armchair like psychologists here.
I'm like armchair psychologist. He has not shown to me when I've watched games with him the ability to command and dictate a cohesive offense. He has an insane ability to ad-lib plays, which adds tremendous value to his fantasy value, his rushing ability, right? But it scares me in terms of getting long-term extensions from deals. Do I absolutely think he's probably going to be in the league for a long time? Sure. But I do worry about him being on a consistently good team for a long period of his career. So
that's interesting. I mean, he did sign that mega deal. So I think, well, of course, Wentz at one point signed a mega deal and then is now gone. So that's
already 2 or 3 years into that, isn't he?
That's a good question. I actually don't know the answer to that question.
I thought it was a few years into it, but yeah. It'll be interesting to see what I read recently. It's like, I think it was today actually. It was like Arizona Cardinals put out a tweet saying, our QB1 or my QB1. It was like a Kyler spread or whatever. And somebody on Reddit said, like, if you have to keep saying it, you're just saying it to yourself. So it's, you say it enough so it's true. It's like
you're trying to convince yourself.
He's signed up. Yeah,
he's signed up through 2028. So contractually is not something I'm super worried about. But I think it really comes down to if you could get, like you said, at some point in a heavy rebuild, enough late firsts in value it is worth it to try to just spin the wheel, especially in a class that is going to have 5 to 6 quarterback prospects that you want to take a stab at. So I tend to agree with you. Like, just get your first or get a couple, either get a first this year or JSN, late seconds, that mid first of 2025, 2026. I think I would tend to agree. You want to do it, but make sure you have that golf buyer before you pull the trigger. So in a similar vein, this is not going to be in a rebuild. In a vacuum, would you sell? Would you move off a Dak who had a really good year last year for Bryce Young and same as the last one, mid 25 first, mid 26 first? Basically, would you go for the young core for a guy who was, I think, the QB3 last year in most formats?
Nope.
No. Easy no.
I mean, I really feel like if that's so, Dak's probably your QB1. I mean, if you're lucky, QB2, right? I really feel like making a switch like that, you're either banking on Bryce Young having one of the most remarkable turnarounds in fantasy football history, or you're just giving up. I mean, I just feel like that is you're turning a top tier win now fantasy asset into a lot of lotto tickets, a lot of hope. And
is this one of those kind of trades where in theory it's probably in theory it feels good, but in reality you're really just pushing the window out into a forever rebuild?
That's exactly. I couldn't have put it better. Yes, that's exactly right. This is a trade that some of our friends that we know who like to rebuild every year make, and again, it's not attractive to keep Dak. Again, I don't think a lot of people know just how successful in fantasy football he has been. But I mean, I just don't like giving up that much immediate value to that much potential value, because again, it's a lot of potential value, but it's not
realized, and that 26 first really hurts.
It feels bad. It feels bad. That's what I keep looking at. Yeah.
I'm someone. For me, I always frustrate people in my leagues because I will both not value I will not value someone's 26 first basically for anything. But if anybody asks me about mine, I'm not moving it because the downside is so awful and so far into the future that there's just really, for me, 26 first should just really become untradeable just in general. There's no the upside is limited to buying them and the downside is awful to selling them.
Exactly. If it was Bryce Young and 2 mid-25s, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to try to move one of the mid-25s for like a Goff.
Yeah.
But I can't move that mid-26 for Goff. I can't move it for probably even Cousins.
No. I mean, what do you think you could get for that mid-26? A Geno? An Aaron Rodgers?
I would trade Geno for that, but like again, like if I have Geno, like I have Geno in a couple leagues and he's my quarterback too, and I hate it. And but I can't like if I get rid of him, I don't have if he's my QB2, that tells you who my QB3 is. And so I can't really get rid of him for a mid 26. It's like I want to, but yeah, I mean, in a vacuum, if somebody had, a Geno to sell and had 4 quarterbacks on their team, yeah, but that's so rare. It's tough, man.
100%. I think we both would agree that unless you're in unless like the last one, unless you're in a heavy rebuild, I can't sell Dak for all of that. It's a lot of capital. There's definitely a world where Bryce comes back, is valued equally to Dak next year, and you feel foolish. But it's if you think you're going to win any games this year, it's probably just too much of a risk once you factor in that mid 26 first. And finally, moving on to our last trade, would you rather have Ayuk in the 207 or Jalen Waddle?
Oh boy, I'm laughing because I love both players.
They're both really good and really fun.
They're both, I think, really fun, really undervalued. For whatever reason, Ayuk is really interesting. Great team. I think the knock on him is just so many weapons on his team. He just never is going to see a large target share.
There's a lot of smoke to the fire of him moving on in the near future. He might be a trade candidate.
And if that's the case, if you feel like if you're, I do, remember seeing something like that now that you say that, but again, it's tough in the NFL. It's tough to take too seriously. If it was the NBA, we know that that person's probably going to get moved. Whereas in the NFL, it's just these trades just don't happen very often.
There are few and far between, but they do. There is. It feels like recently there's like one every couple years. Like you'll get a little while ago was Diggs.
Yeah, the AJ Brown one.
You get the AJ Brown. You get the DJ Moore. Eventually, these guys are just these wide receivers are moved just because those contracts get a little bit wonky, and people want to people would rather take a stab at that second round wide receiver who's going to cost them $1.2 million as opposed to paying DJ Moore $25 million.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it not only do you if you think that Ayuk is going to be traded or there's going to be some movement within, I mean, then you got to start thinking about does Debo become a buy? My first instinct when you said those two guys, it's like, God, Waddle has fell so far. I mean, we're what 12 months, less than 12 months removed from him going at the 205 in startups.
100%, yeah.
It just feels like to me, if Tyreek goes down and he struggled with injuries a little bit this year and Waddle wasn't able to take advantage of it because he struggled with injuries too. If Tyreek was to ever go down, he would go from T. Higgins to Chase really quick. Again, nothing wrong with T. Higgins, nothing wrong with Waddle, nothing wrong with that boomer bust, averaging 13, 14 points per game and you're going to get a 30-point outburst or a 5-point shit game, but this is the tough one. This is a really tough one. I like this question.
It's interesting because it's not as tough for me.
It's Ayuk, isn't it?
It's not to me Ayuk or Waddle. It's the pick. because I think you're getting something when the difference between the two players is minimal. And I think people would be surprised how often they could probably find these kind of trades where you tear down ever so slightly, like even not even a great tear down, but it's like you find people's preferences and you manage to find this like 207 or like a late second or an early third. And if you'd be really surprised if you stack a bunch of those on top of each other, just how quickly you rack up value.
I'm going to disagree with you in terms of, I think it's a great trade down. I think you're making a fabulous point, and it's not something that I've thought about very often. Like think about deals where we trade, like Mahomes to Herbert in a first or something like that. But this is a really interesting point, and I think it's a great point. And I think it's a great trade down. I think this is something that you should do, and I think you made a good point. I think you're swaying me a little bit here.
Imagine if you had Waddle and you traded down to Brandon Ayuk and you picked up a 207, and then you traded Ayuk down to like Drake London and you picked up a 208, and you traded Drake London down and you went down to a Jaden Reed and you picked up a 209, and now you're sitting there. You have basically traded Jalen Waddle for Jaden Reed in like 3 late seconds. Where it's like, I would feel like the difference between Jalen Waddle and Jaden Reed is like maybe a first round pick, maybe.
I think that might even be higher than what it actually is.
So it's like you
which is crazy.
Those late seconds, like especially in this draft, they really add up quick because I think even maybe just this draft specifically, because I think mid to late seconds are going to be a value, but I think just in general, always be on the lookout for those kind of trade downs where you do a really good job of this, of knowing what people's preferences are. And I almost don't want to give you this advice because you're going to weaponize it in our leagues. But if you know somebody, if you know what your league mates' preferences are, and you can try to find those opportunities, I would poke around a little bit more than probably what most people have the attention span to do. And I'm guilty of this. It's February 27th, and I don't think I've sent a trade offer in any of my leagues for like 2 weeks, just because it's like,
No, February, you sent one to me, and what's funny is you sent me the guy that I absolutely adore, and you knew it was going to be tough, no matter what you sent for me to turn down. But that's a great point, and that's what you were trying to do, is you were trying to tear down. And to what we talked about earlier, so you're making this point with like adding Ayuk in the 207 and getting that 207 for not a lot of difference between Ayuk and Waddle. And we were talking earlier about that Goff trade, or having somebody as a Goff buyer. Like, if you're a good fantasy dynasty player, like you're going to be in a lot of leagues, or at least a few leagues, and you got to know your teammates well. And I'm not bragging, and I know you're not bragging either, but it's like, I could tell you right now off the top of my head, like 15 people that would buy Goff at value at market prices. Okay. I can tell you like 20 that would buy Lamar Jackson at market prices. I can tell you probably 10 that would buy Waddle at market prices. And so just having those people on the back burner to then make those kinds of trades, especially the one like you just said, to pick up that 207, that's going to win you fantasy football leagues, because when you draft Laporta at the 207, you're going to look really, really smart when you got Laporta and Ayuk for Waddle.
God, I have no Laporta, and I'm so sad about it. I just didn't see him coming. I actually do want to. You alluded to this trade earlier, and I was surprised when you declined it. What you just weren't a fan of Hurts and Jalen Warren for Dak and Tyreek? Is just not too. You're too high on those guys?
So I have this fabulous co-host that tells me all the time that even though I have a ton of shares of Tyreek, I'm still undervaluing him. He's worth more than A.J. Brown. He's one of the best win now players besides CMC. And additionally, Dak is undervalued. Dak is, was the QB 3 last year or whatever he was. He was the QB1 in 2020, and he's going in like the mid thirds or early thirds and startups or whatever it is. So, I mean, it's, again, I'm a product of my environment a little bit too. And also, don't forget, I have so much Hurts. Like I'm at a point where I'm a little nervous. Like if he goes down with the shares of and Hurts I have, I'll just be watching from the sidelines in like 30 leagues. So I gotta watch myself a little bit when it comes to like number of shares of players. So
that's fair. It gives me PTSD because I had a lot of J.K. Dobbins, and that it was a great half of football to watch him play before he tore his Achilles. I allude to that Hurts for Dak trade because it's one of those funny trades where if you plug it into my calculator, I lose. Market wise, I lose by a good bit, but personal wise, I win by a good bit. Just kind of really indicative of the fact that I can't get enough of Dak Prescott and Tyreek Hill, even though I have no Tyreek Hill. But if you're going to give me mid third round prices on him, I just got to snatch that up as much as I can. The problem, as we in our leagues, Dak and Tyreek Hill are owned by people that tend to like Dak and Tyreek Hill.
It was, and this is good that we're talking about this because I think this gives a really good insight for people listening. But like when I look at that trade, I think of like all the people around me who really like Dak, who talk up Dak, who really, I don't want to say put him on a pedestal, but like put him like at the position he deserves when you look at what his fantasy production has been. To me, I brought that to the table, but then you're now adding Tyreek. And Tyreek, again, I think he's a very polarizing player to a lot of people. There are some dynasty players that are like, he's so old and he's going to retire soon. That's what he said on that podcast at one time, and all these different things. And they like lower his value. And then you have other people who are like, you should digest these fantasy leagues in 3-year intervals. And it doesn't get better than Tyreek. He can put up 50-point games and he averages as much as Justin Jefferson and all these different. And it's like you put those two together and it's like, maybe if the Eagles offense was functional at the moment, but like there is so many question marks and concerns about the Eagles offense, not necessarily about Jalen Hurts. I'm not one of those, tush push truthers where it's like, it's going to get banned and Jalen Hurts is going to be exposed and all that BS. But there's concern with the Eagles offense, and then it's like I do really like adore these other two these other two 100%. Players. So it's a really interesting trade.
100%. It just kind of leads me into the idea that I think I mentioned on the podcast and in our group chats that the idea that I was really interested to see what happened to these vets over the course of the offseason. Like once we got, because during the season, you could clearly kind of see like Kamara was a 5th round, started picking value. Keenan Allen was a 6th. I think Kamara was actually a 4th. Mike Evans was a 7th. Tyreek Hill was arguably the mid to late 1st. CMC the same. And the second, we're 2 months out of the season, and these guys have just kind of dropped back to where they were. So it's not a fun pick to make in startup values, but in startups, but at some point,
the real question is why not? Like, I think there's too many people out there that aren't willing to. I don't want to say attempt to win now, because I definitely don't think with Dynasty you want to put all your eggs in one basket like that. But like, you can balance it. You can have win now Tyreek, you can have win now CMC, and you can have some developmental players on the back end. You can draft a JSN and roll them out as your wide receiver 3. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Like, it's a way to play, and I think it's probably underlooked at least. I don't think a lot of people are doing that. It's kind of all or one. It's kind of like, I'm going to draft all old vets and I'm going to go super win now, or I'm going to draft. I don't think a lot of people are like, okay, well, I have these, 2 developmental quarterbacks. I got, maybe like Bryce Young, and I got, I'm trying to think of another example. And I got Deshaun, Levis. Where I'm hoping, Levis. That's a great example. And I got Levis, and I'm going to roll them out as my QB 1 and 2. And I was able to pick up Russ as my QB 3, and because I have those young developmental pieces at quarterback, I'm going to draft CMC and Tyreek and Kamara and, and mix in some other few young players. But I'm going to draft these old players, and I'm going to have a really good mix. I'm going to have a really interesting mix where no 1 week I'm going to get my ass kicked. I'm always going to put up a really good. And then if week 7 rolls around and I'm 1-6, all right, I might sell the farm.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah,
if I'm 6-1, I might sell my developmental pieces, right? So,
absolutely. I think if I had to guess, I think it's more. I think the vets falling is not probably not as much. Now that I think about it, it's not really a case of people not drafting the vets. I think it's probably just the vets having a wider drafted range than probably the younger guys. Because I think you, but if you're getting into a draft and you're in that mid second round, I think people don't hesitate to pull the trigger on a Breece Hall, but you've got enough people that hesitate to pull the trigger on a Tyreek Hill that it just kind of drops his ADP a little bit. So relatively speaking, he looks way less, but it just, in reality, he's not really dropping that far. It's one of those situations where his ADP and trade value aren't the same, but just kind of another one of those scenarios where it's just, there's enough concern that it technically drops some ADP just because there has to be a ranking, but it's not that big a deal.
I mean, on fantasy calc, Tyreek Hill is wide receiver 9 and Olave is wide receiver 10. And I think that's the struggle that you're talking about, is when somebody gets to that level, are they taking Olave, or are they taking for his entire career, and they're taking right? And me and you are like Tyreek.
I'm taking Hill. I would if I was in a league right now, I would add something small to Olave to get to Hill.
Me too, absolutely. And Tyreek. Okay, so then Tyreek Hill or Garrett Wilson, because they're the next two. That's wide receiver 8 and wide receiver 9. And I think I would trade Tyreek Hill straight up for. I'm sorry, I would trade Garrett Wilson straight up for Tyreek. To be quite honest with you, maybe I'd ask for something a little bit. Yeah,
it depends on what my team was like. If my team, like we talked about, if my team had a bunch of young guys and I needed that infusion of high level production, I would draft a Tyreek Hill. I would take a Hill over Wilson straight up. But if I had if my team was sitting there and it had a Bijan, an Achane, a Stroud, a Rashee Rice, a Zay Flowers, and a Garrett Wilson, it's like, okay, let me convert one of these young high end pieces for veteran production, because I know it's like, okay, I've got tons of youth to back up that up. But if I had probably an older team, I would want Garrett Wilson just to kind of make me feel a little better about my age curve. But it's definitely Garrett Wilson right now has an ADP of 6 higher than Hill, and I think they should be a lot closer, and it's more just indicative of the fact that there's just a lot of really good players in that first 30 picks.
Yeah, I think, and that was, you asked me at the very start. I'm going to make a full circle here. The one impression I got out of all these startups is I don't really want a first round pick. I don't really even want Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes like I did last year. I'm hoping, honestly, I'm hoping that I could take that pick and trade it for a second and a third and pick up a lot of the guys in the range that we're talking about. It just seems like there's so much more value there than it is drafting really high. I don't know.
No, I tend to agree. It is an interesting idea, because I think you and I had the same kind of theory last year, that the cheapest an elite quarterback tends to be is in the startup. So you can make a trade in a startup for one of these elite guys like a Herbert, a Burrow, at last year a Fields, which look how well that went. Right. But you can make those trades in a way that once the draft ends, you really can't make it. But yeah, it's really tough. Once you get out, even once you get out of those top 3, and even within it, there's definitely a lot of good pieces in that top 30.
Yep.
But I think that's going to do it for us, brother. That was a good one. I'm glad we were able to get back on the horse after a couple weeks of taking it easy.
I needed it.
And recovering.
I was recovering, man. It was a long 3 weeks, especially when going to work and having real life and a bunch of little ones running around. But I appreciate your patience, and to everyone listening, all 8 of you, I do really appreciate it. So,
and with that, we're going to sign off. Thank you for listening, guys. Have a good night.
Take care.